And there's nothing that man can imagine that they can bring to pass because we're the God kind. Like what he said about Nimrod. When they were building the Tower of Babel, he said, listen, man, this is a problem. They're in our image, and there's nothing that they can't imagine that they can't bring to pass. And he confounds the thing, you know.
It's an amazing thought, the resourcefulness of a human being. Because I was listening to a podcast, a TED Talk about citizen scientists, and how this one family, she was a campus pastor, and he had some other arts and crafts kind of degree, and their two children, 5 and 3, were diagnosed with a premature aging disease. They left their jobs, and in 4 years they discovered the gene that caused that, and then have gone on to create foundations to help develop research for that. I mean, it's just the resourcefulness and the power in the brain through all of that stuff is just amazing.
Yeah.
Just absolutely amazing.
Because it takes a dynamic design to, I mean, think about the vastness of God.
Right.
Elohim. He found something that he could contain himself in, that could contain him. Not keep him from coming out, but you see what I mean? It could hold him, a vessel, right? That he could be animated through. And so it takes a dynamic design for something like that. Do you see what I'm saying? Even just to begin with, it takes something dynamic that as a vessel that can even hold the fullness of God and give expression to it. So it already takes something dynamic, right? Yeah. And so the human being is a dynamic design already. And so the things that a human being can bring to pass, man, is obscene. Now listen, the one thing that's outside of our design is that our design does not possess the ability to bring forth eternal life. And so it doesn't matter how dynamic our design is and what we can get to come about through our own ability and through our own will and through our own desire and through our own imagination, through our own vision, we can never bring about eternal life, right? That's the thing that's outside of it. But inside of the other parameters, man, if we can see it, if we can imagine it, man, there isn't very much that we can't bring to pass with our own will. Yeah. Just because of the way God designed us. Right?
Yeah.
And I think the reason the Lord stopped us at that time is He knew we weren't ready for that. You understand what I'm saying? Like, they built this tower. We think, man, we got smartphones. We can talk to one another on FaceTime, you know? Why didn't He stop that before we got there?
Yeah.
Well, that was before the Lord's advent, when He came to provide life for people. So if people found life in their abilities to attain back then, it would have been a real problem, a stumbling block for people to come to know Him.
Yeah, with no Christ having already come.
That's right.
No word to preach.
Yes,
right.
You know, I just saw something that is like an instant translator that people wear as an earbud.
Yeah.
I mean,
isn't that crazy?
I mean, you're almost there with one of these.
Well,
it's not instant, but you're almost there.
Right.
Translates another language?
Yeah,
like you have like Trump and the Chinese president. They'll sit across from each other on their table. They'll wear an earbud, and as the other one's talking, it'll translate it for them immediately.
I thought that was like somebody behind the scenes.
No.
Just doing it mechanically.
Amazing. Absolutely.
Hi guys.
Hi. We've been missing you all.
I know. It's almost done on Wednesdays.
It's almost done?
Oh yeah, how's that going?
It's good. It's good.
Wait, what is it?
It's the freedom class.
Oh, okay.
So, I told them I was going to do it, so, we're going through it, so it's good.
That's one of my favorite things. Freedom. Yeah. When I was a kid, they had this band that, they're not godly or anything, and they're quite confused and deceived and angry and everything. But one of their songs was, at the end of it, it starts and it builds up like this heavy music, and all of a sudden the guy just starts screaming, "Freedom!" Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that's like the cry even in an ungodly person's heart, and they don't realize it. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, he had all this pent up angst and frustration with just a cry for freedom.
Yeah.
Well, you remember the movie Braveheart.
Exactly.
Just
that's what
like
I was just thinking.
Just like that.
Just like that. But man, to this day, I love that. And some of my Christian friends that don't understand freedom just exactly yet. I'll be like, how can you like that? It's like, because I see the heart.
Right.
I'm not judging what it looks like or what it sounds like. I hear the cry for freedom. Listen, maybe you don't like that kind of music, but I also always had that cry for freedom in my heart. So I can identify with that. And now when I think of this cry of freedom, deep in the heart, deep in the soul, deep in me, I see how God had also had that cry for freedom. Right? And he cried that out on the cross. Right?
Yeah.
Freedom.
Yeah.
And man, and so I get moved by that all the time. You know, and I still go back and listen to that song sometimes, just for that very reason. And even sometimes when I'm getting up to preach, I have that song echoing in my heart. You know? And it's a powerful thing. It's a powerful thing. I love Braveheart. I love that movie. No matter how many times I watch that movie.
It was a little rough.
Yeah.
No matter how many times I watch that movie, it moves me.
I don't think I ever watched it.
He probably fell asleep there.
Yeah.
Me too.
He watched it 3 times and fell asleep.
That was
He's got long
Kentucky.
hair, right? All I ever smell is a shaky guy.
There's so many Christ undertones in that, though. I mean, it says that Jesus came to his own and his own accepted him not. You know, at the end where they're fighting that war and the guy that comes and stops the war and his hat comes off and he sees it's their king. And he's just like, he just gives up, you know. That's like Jesus, you know, he came to his own. I mean, that guy laid down his life to come help them. And then he finds out that they cohorted with the enemy. And that they were the ones leading the charge against them. And it's just broken on the inside, you know. Yeah, I get chills just thinking about that. You know, but that cry of freedom, it's a powerful thing, you know.
And it has, at least for me, it has new impact and new meaning. Understanding, you know, where we've come from in the last 5 or 6 years, it has much more power. The word freedom isn't just, it's just not just a word anymore. It has real meaning.
Yeah, freedom from the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, right.
Now I can see, even in this earthen vessel, I can live a life even in this earthen vessel that sometimes can look like it doesn't possess life and not judge it as being evil.
Right.
Do you see?
Yes.
Right? Before, based on what we could see in our earthen vessels and the fruit that was coming forth in our lives and what was going on around us, our conscience was corrupted with good or evil, where we judge ourselves as good or evil based on what we see manifesting.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, then that possesses the ability to bring shame, guilt, fear, condemnation, thoughts of lack, depression, laboring and toiling. But now, through Jesus, my conscience has been set free from the knowledge of good and evil, where I don't judge myself by good or evil, as good or evil, based on what I see. Right? I see that God has come and given a judgment about my life in Jesus. And that set me free from all the judgments that could come from the world or from the scene of what is good or evil. Right?
Yes.
You see, that's one of the big problems for Adam. I mean, you could talk about the knowledge of good and evil and its application for your whole life and probably not exasperate it. But one of the things that happened from the knowledge of good and evil is that when Adam saw himself naked, he made a judgment that he was evil.
Right.
And his judgment that he was evil brought great pain to his heart and fear of God. Right?
Yeah.
And it caused his conscience to be filled with labor and toiling to try to atone for the evil that he judged himself to be, based on what he saw. Right? And so what God come to do is come to clothe our heart with his judgment about our life, so our conscience can be washed clean from the judgment we make about ourselves based on everything we see going around as to whether we're good or evil. Right? Like growing up as a kid, I had this idea that if I didn't find a wife, that was evil. And that meant I was evil. And that I lacked. I had this judgment that if I didn't go get certain degrees, that would mean I was evil and I lacked. I had this judgment if I didn't maximize my athletic potential and go to the Olympics and win gold medals, I was evil. Do you see all these judgments of what is good and what is evil? Right? And if I couldn't get what I decided was good to be brought to pass, that would judge me as evil. Right? And then that led to great pain, man. Great pain. Well, God come to wash our conscience clean from that, where we don't look at those things and judge ourselves as good or evil by what we see manifesting or what we see going on around us or what people say to us or what we have or what we do or what we get or what we can attain to, where we're just free from judging that.
You know, while you're speaking this, I'm thinking of a patient of mine, his son, and I knew this kid, you know, growing up, but he spent 6 years getting himself ready for SEAL school. I mean, this is a kid that like knew what he was gonna do ahead of time, the whole deal. And I mean to tell you, he was a stellar kid, and he looked bulletproof to me. And he just went through that crushing moment where, you know, everything he did, he rang the bell.
He rang the bell. Oh man, that must have been a painful moment.
But you know what? It's like I see that and my heart falls, and then I go, man, something really amazing is about to happen.
Freedom.
Yeah.
What does that mean? He rang the bell.
He quit.
He quit.
He dropped out of the thing, and they're amping you on. Go ring the bell. You can't make it.
That's right.
You were never cut out for this.
Right.
It's right there.
This is the kid that, I mean, his brother was a SEAL.
He was in the training.
Oh yeah, he went through. I mean, I'm telling you, this guy was training, for tries with us just to get ready in high school. That's how long he's been at this.
Now, do you see? He made a judgment
Yes.
that it was good
Yes.
to be a SEAL,
Right.
and evil to not be a SEAL.
Right,
Now,
right.
what that did is that set up in his heart and judged him as
Yep.
righteous or unrighteous.
Wow.
Right? And that filled him with laboring and toiling
Yep.
to become.
Yep.
Right?
Let me tell you something. Here's a good report though. After this, because he rang this bell. I mean, he was kind of at odds with his dad, and because he rang this bell, he had to like go back home, or he had to just say, "Dad, it's not for me." And his dad just went, "Man, I'm so glad you're my son." And it was like, at first when I heard this news, I was like, just like everybody else, I don't know, he rang the bell. And then all of a sudden, I saw the heart of the dad that just went, man, all I could do was like hug him, and he's going out there to see him now. It's like, I already see the greater purpose in this was like a reconnecting of that father and son,
What could happen is that he was crucified in his heart to that knowledge of good and evil,
Right.
to that judgment that he made.
Yeah.
He experienced a death. That's the sorrow,
Yes,
right?
experienced
It's that
death.
feeling of sorrow at first, the shame that tries to come upon you, just like it tried to come to Jesus
Yeah.
when he's hanging on the cross.
Yeah.
But see, then he could die to that false judgment, that
Yeah.
knowledge of good and evil that he had made based on the tree.
Yeah.
And see, that then freedom can actually come. Right? And
Right.
so it's part of like being crucified with Christ. Part of being crucified with Christ is dying to all the judgments you made about your life based on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yes.
That's one of the most powerful parts of being crucified with Christ, and innocence restored. Not just innocence to God. We're so consumed with God as the prosecuting attorney. We think innocence is about us being innocent to God. And it's about our conscience being innocent from all the judgments we made that came from the wrong tree. And how those judgments were killing us, man. And all the time judging us as righteous or unrighteous. And man, when you see that and you die to all those judgments, you die to what that tree has tried to sow into your life. It's a beautiful thing. But let me tell you what, when it first happens and that tree is judging you, just like a physical death sometimes don't feel so nice.
Right.
There can be pain because you actually feel like you're dying.
Yeah.
The thing is, you're not really dying. The thing is, the image that was created in your heart of what it takes to be justified is dying. Right?
Right.
That image is dying.
Right.
And now,
Like painting out.
right, you're being set free. And now the
Right.
seed that is Christ can come and be planted in your heart.
Right.
And now you could see there's one judgment about my life that can be good. God's the one who's given it forth. And I see in Jesus that the judgment, it just is. It isn't something I attain to by what I do, what I get, what I have, or what ladder I can climb. It comes inherently from God.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And then you start living by that. And it's an amazing thing because then you stop judging your life as good or evil.
Right.
Guess what else happens when that happens? You stop judging other people's lives. Or you stop judging them as good or evil
Right.
based on the fruit you see. that allows you to then feel compassion and love for a person, even should they have fruit that comes forth from the evil one manifesting in their life sometimes. Right? Because you're not judging them as good or evil by the fruit.
Right.
You're not judging who they are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
There's a difference between, if I'm filled with laboring and toiling, that wisdom is evil, and that wisdom is bringing forth the fruit of labor and toil in me and judging who a person is. Right?
Yes.
You see that? And then, man, you can walk with people where they're at and love on them and not have to try to tear down everything they think in one fatal swoop. You just kind of become their friend. And through the course of being somebody's friend, the wisdom of God that's in you can be born in them just by you being around them, talking to them. Talking about your own experiences. You don't even have to come against their experience. You can hear them talking, and you can just kind of say, yeah, well, I remember when I was blah, 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 and this is what happened to me. You see how you just talked about yourself?
Sure. Right.
You didn't talk about them, so now they don't feel, right? Now they're just free to consider what you said about your own life and what happened with you. Right? I mean, I learned that at my job. I'm like a very intense person. I don't know if you guys know or not. It's difficult for me to talk. Man, sometimes I go back and look at the videos and my face changes 50 million ways, and I'm like, my goodness. I'm like, Lord, do I need Botox or something so my face just will stay like this? But when I first got promoted at that finance company to be the manager, I was so intense. The way I managed was, we got to bring forth the good in these people, and here's how we're going to do it. But then, man, as I walked through that with God, I started realizing there was a different way to do it. And I started, have you considered? I remember when I started talking about myself so they didn't feel like they were put on the defensive. They didn't feel like I was scrutinizing them. I just was talking about it from my perspective, and that made it easy for them to listen. Right?
Sure.
Because the moment someone feels like they're put on the defensive, many times it becomes difficult for them to hear. Because self-justifications.
Yeah. Right.
Unless a person is swimming in the truth. Right? Like whenever a person comes against me, I actually consider it. Every time. And because I'm not trying to be justified by being right. So even should a person agree with something that I believe is the truth for a while, I'll go and consider it for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm not trying to be justified by being right. But most people, if you attack them like that, or you come against, they're going to defend, and then they don't hear.
Right.
They don't hear anymore, right?
They're worried about building that wall.
Right? No. They're busy. Oh, I must be evil now if I was doing it wrong. Or you see how they're judging themselves by the knowledge of good and evil? The moment they do that, self-justification is going to come. Just like Adam, it's that woman you gave me.
That's right.
When God came and said, "Did you eat from that tree?" It's that woman you gave me.
That's right.
I mean, he wouldn't even say, I ate from the tree. It's that woman you gave me.
When you said something about you're talking about your own life, I've seen people where I knew I am talking about my own life. And in their head, they took that, put it inside, and then all of a sudden transferred that into a judgment that I was making on them.
Yep.
And I went, what?
They were living in your head.
I looked at them and I said, this is what happened to me. I don't impose that on you. And then but I mean, it's like they're so caught up in that knowledge of good and evil and judgment that even when they hear your story, they'll take and I mean, I've had to correct people on that and go, what did I tell you? I told you this is what I did. I didn't tell you.
Well, but you got to understand, that is their own conscience working in their hearts.
Right.
Yes.
They may come back at you, but it's not because you're talking about them.
Yeah.
Something's happening inside of them.
Right, exactly.
So you don't have to worry too much about that.
And they're hearing through
It
a
can't
filter, which is a lie in their heart.
Right.
And when you hear through that lie, everything is screwed up.
And some people will react that way. Other people won't.
Right.
They're not ready to
They'll
go.
read it. They'll apply it to themselves.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
they'll recognize, hey, this guy's just sharing with me how he feels, his experiences, how he overcame, and they start thinking, man, that could apply to me too.
That's not even a negative thing. They might have been upset because you were just talking about your life, and then they saw something about their own life
Yeah.
Right.
that now all of a sudden was like
Yeah.
upsetting.
Right.
And so it might take a little while for them to iron that out.
I know.
Do you see? So what you did was probably highly effective.
Well,
Sometimes things that are revealed to you can be painful, like when God come and revealed to me, or helped me to reveal to myself that I was busy wanting houses and cars and accolades and gold medals and national anthem playing and Wheaties boxes rather than the fruit of the Spirit. Listen, man, that didn't feel so good when that happened. No way. I was busy thinking all this time I was serving God.
Right.
But then God says, listen, man, didn't Paul say that God neither dwells in temples made with man's hands, nor is God worshipped by men's hands? We're so consumed thinking something we're going to do through our own hands is how we're going to worship God. But Jesus said God is spirit. And so those who worship God must worship Him in spirit, even in truth. What that means is God is spirit. Within God is the Holy Spirit. That Holy Spirit is the Spirit of truth. And if you want to worship God, you believe on the truth that dwells in Him. That's the only way you can do it. That's what Jesus was talking about. We're so busy thinking we worship. Listen, I'm not worshiping God through this ministry. That's not what's going on here.
Right.
This ain't me worshiping God. You can't worship God through some ministry. You can't worship God through your service. You can't worship God by loving people. Those are all the fruit of worshiping God. You see? Big difference. You worship God by believing the testimony He has given in His Son. That's how you worship God. Why? Because He is spirit. And those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit, even in truth. The King James says spirit and truth. That word "and" is even. So worship Him in spirit, even truth. It's an expounding on what it means to worship Him in spirit. So when it says worship Him in spirit and truth, the "and truth" is an expounding on what it means to worship Him in spirit. You worship Him in spirit by believing on the truth that was made flesh in Jesus. You see? That's it. There's a period at the end of that. How do you worship God? You worship God by believing on the testimony He's given in His Son. Period. That's the only way you can worship God. Now, things can be born outside of your reverential awe of what He said and done in Jesus, but that's not worshiping Him. That's the fruit coming forth from you having been in reverential awe of Him. Right? Jesus defined worshiping God as being in the fear of the Lord. What is the fear of the Lord? The fear of the Lord isn't, I'm very scared. The fear of the Lord is you hear what He said in Jesus and you're in awe and you believe on it.
The beginning of wisdom.
Right? That's what it is to worship God. That's what it means to worship God. Jesus said the true worshipers. Who were the false worshipers? The Pharisees. How were they worshiping God?
With the
Works of their hands.
With their hands.
Yeah.
God when Moses went up the mountain and God says, Moses, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. What was He saying? That the ground had never sinned and lived right? No. Exactly. The word holy means set apart. And what God was saying is that Moses, you're standing on ground that's been set apart to my Spirit of grace. If you want to worship me or fellowship with me, take off your shoes because your shoes have been made by men's hands.
That's good.
I mean, even when He had Moses make the altar after Exodus at 19 and Exodus 20, He tells Moses not to make the altar with tools. Why? Men's hands. It would defile it and corrupt it. The worship of God is defiled the moment we add in our works of service as being our worship. It's defiled. It's no longer set apart to the Spirit. It's defiled. Now, does that mean we won't love? No. Does that mean we won't do works of service? No. That's not what I'm saying. But that's not how we worship God. And the moment we create a doctrine where we say that's how we worship God, we are not far away from becoming servants instead of sons and daughters. Right? We're not far away from becoming like the elder son in the story of the prodigal son. Didn't I do everything?
Yeah.
See, he was busy trying to serve his father by what he did. And his father said, everything's always been yours, man. You never had to do one thing for me to serve me to get any of it. You just had to believe that it was yours because you were my son. I mean, you worship God when you say, Abba.
Right.
Because God came in the person of Jesus and revealed himself to be Father. And so worshiping God is to call God Abba. You're in awe, in reverence to what he said through his Son, which is that he come and revealed himself as Father. And so when you say Abba from the heart, you're worshiping God because you've believed on the truth that was made flesh in Jesus. It's that simple, man. It's that simple. It's that simple. You see how that works?
Some churches put so much emphasis on how we can serve God. Like serving him is number one.
Yeah.
But he was never looking for servants.
No.
We had someone come and groom our dog. He came to the house to do it. He's got his own little trailer and found out what church he went to, and it's a church that a lot of our friends go to. And the first thing he said is, well, do your family members and friends serve there? That's like, it seems to me their number one
It is.
emphasis on this one church is to serve. Do you serve there? What is your service to this?
Not unique to that church, though.
No, it's not.
No, but he
No.
never was looking for servants.
No.
One of the old hymns.
No.
Yeah.
Real close.
No. And so, really, service to God, if we want to define it spiritually, would just be to believe on the testimony he's given in his Son. That's it. What are the service of God that we might do then? That's what the apostles were asking Jesus. What are the works of God that we might do them? What did Jesus say?
Believe.
To believe on the one he sent.
I shared that very scripture with a gentleman who groomed our dog. I said, I don't know why I never had seen that scripture before I came into Grace.
Yeah.
But I shared that with him, and then I shared the other favorite one is, this is love. Not that we love God, but that
Yeah.
He loves us.
See what you said.
Man, I've never heard that before.
What you did was just what Greg said. You said what your testimony was.
Yeah.
And
Right,
those
right.
words are going to ring in his head.
Yeah.
Not, you're doing it wrong, but this is what I.
Yeah. Now he's going to walk away thinking about just what you said about your life.
Right.
And he's in bondage and he doesn't realize it. I mean, he probably feels burdened, but he doesn't realize why. And listen, the carnal mind will hear what I just said about what it means to worship God. And you know what they'll hear? That guy said we don't do anything. That guy said we don't love. That guy says we don't do any ministering. Would you see me doing ministering? Listen, if I plopped open my schedule for you and you could look at it, you would see I'm doing a whole lot of ministering. It's just that has been born from the true worship of God, right? By His doing, not by me saying I'm going to serve God. And that actually sets me free to labor more abundantly than them all. Yet not I, but the grace of God that dwells in me. Right? Because I've seen that worshiping God is to believe on the testimony of His Son. Well, guess what happens when you're all the time looking on the testimony He's given His Son? You receive strength from the Son. And then you find that give birth to all manner of things in you. Right? And so it's not a word of how we're not going to do anything, but it's also not a word of how we're going to put people on a timeline on when they're going to do it. It's just a word of this is what it really means to worship God. Let us set our eyes on that. And then, of course, we know out of union with God, things will come forth.
Yes.
Right? But we're not going to judge ourselves or our life or who we are or what God wants from us based on that.
Let me give you this probably a pretty good example of what we're talking about here. You know, I've always been a little contrary to like people trying to get me to do things for the Lord or whatever. Well, right after I came to know the Lord, at church, to digress a little bit, I had a friend that I worked with who was a pastor of a church, really great guy and everything. So anyway, one time he tells me, he says, you want to go to a Saints football game with me? And I said, yeah, man, let's go, you know. Andrew, you remember? I think I might have shared this before, but it's a good example. So anyway, we go to the Saints football game and we get out of his truck. And he says, Maurice, he says, I got these Bible tracts that I'd like to hand out because we're going to the Saints game. And I looked at him and I said, Andrew, listen. The day God tells me in my heart, hand out tracts at a Saints football game, I'll go do it. But until then, I ain't doing it. And he looked at me and he said, fair enough. And we went and watched it with him. He completely understood where I was coming from.
Yeah.
But shortly thereafter, we're at church, and again, I'm kind of opposed to that kind of stuff like that. The pastor of the church comes to me and says, Maurice, he says, we're going to this movie, Last Temptation of Christ, and we're going to hand out Bible tracts. And I said, what kind of Bible tracts? He said, well, I got this book, and it's the Gospel of John. And on the front of it, it says, you saw the movie, now read the book. That's all it says. And something stirred in my heart that said yes to that. And I went with him to this movie. And all kinds of people were walking out. And I was kind of, a little standoffish about, doing that. And people were handing out the little, tracts. And people would look at them and throw them on the ground, It wasn't well received, I don't believe, but some people were taking it and saying thank you, whatever. Well, I'm standing there, and this young lady is walking kind of toward me. And I said, okay, I'm going to give this Bible. So I give it to her, and she looks at it, and she looks at me, and she says, let me tell you something. I've been called many things. The one thing that I will never be called is a Christian. And I said, okay. And she walked off. And as she walked off, I see her take the Gospel of John and put it in her purse.
Good.
And so it was like all of this, everything I'm sharing with you, like was meant for that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Where I could see what was happening there, that there was some kind of spiritual element to, like, you're being moved to do something by God and not by your own.
Right.
Following your heart.
And not external, like do this, just to put language on it. You know what God does is God comes and says, let us.
Yes.
And your heart will either say, yeah, let us. Or not. Like Father, Son, and Spirit said, let us make man. Every single one of them was like, yeah, let us. And so, man, that's how it says God brings forth the desires in our heart, right? He knows us. He knows the thoughts and intents of our hearts. He sees the things in our hearts, the passions in our heart, the desires in our hearts. And so He'll come to us based on those things and say, let us. And we're like, yeah. We either say in unison with Him, let us, or we don't.
Right.
And if we say let us, now we're committing it back unto Him to bring it forth. Right? It's not now we're going to take it upon ourselves to bring it forth. It's, yeah, Daddy, that sounds like fun. He's all right, I got this.
That's exactly how when he showed me that thing and said, you saw the movie, now read the book, and I knew it was the Gospel of John, and it's just beautiful truth about the truth, I thought to myself, let us. This is good.
Exactly. And that's our union, man. I love the way that's described. It's like my dad is real good at making stuff with his hand. And so when I was a little boy, he has all these great woodworking machines. They can probably do more than just make wood, but he'd make this wood and everything. And so he was going to make us these foot lockers, like these wooden foot lockers, like a chest. And he was going to put, we could put stuff on it. He's going to engrave each one of our names in the thing. I still have that thing.
Wow.
But anyway, he comes to me and he's all, let us make the foot locker.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make the foot locker with me? Yeah, let's make the foot locker. You see how that works? But it wasn't like, okay, here's how you do it, now you go do it. Do you see what I'm saying? Let us let us. And then He'd come and bring it forth. Not me, right? He come and actually did all the stuff. I mean, I minutely participated in a very small way.
Yeah.
My participation was more watching the thing come forth. Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't mean He was ignoring me but no, He's talking about how you do it. This is what He's doing, and I make a couple cuts or whatever, but He's the one who brought it forth. And I just participated in the thing. That's more what it looks like with God. Right?
I heard a story, Greg, about this kind of relates to that too, is that this guy is an artist and he did those paintings like in the church setting where you paint it pretty much upside down, he flips it over and all of a sudden it has this beautiful meaning to it and all that. And so the guy that was talking to him about it said, tell me about your art. And he said, well, I just want to be a servant. for the Lord. And he goes, no, you don't. I said, what? He said, no, you don't. He said, could I ask you to show me your tools that you work with? And he said, yeah, right here. He goes, how do you relate with those tools? Do you have a relationship with those tools? And, that was just really meaningful because, of course, we can't have a relationship with a tool. And so he didn't really want to be a tool. He wanted to be a son, So that's really cool.
Isn't that beautiful?
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Jay.
And so don't be confused about what we're saying about whether we'll do anything for God. It's just the Bible says this, there's a way that seems right unto man, and the end thereof is death. So the way that seems right unto man is I'm going to serve God by what I do. I'm going to serve God by my ministering, by my service. I'm going to serve God by loving, by being kind. I'm going to serve God by doing all those things. That's the way that seems right unto man. That will cast a heavy burden on you that you were never created to bear, and that will eventually minister death to your heart, to your soul, to your spirit. Right? That's the way that seems right unto man. But the actual way, God's ways are so much higher than man's ways. Do you see? Do you see how God's ways doesn't compute to the wisdom in the world? It doesn't compute to the wisdom of the world that love could come forth in you unless you get busy trying to love. Doesn't compute. God's ways are so much higher than man's ways. We think that means He lives so much more right than we live. Right? He's so much more, we think that means He doesn't sin. Right? We think that means He doesn't commit the works of the flesh. That's not what it means. It means the way He thinks is so far above the wisdom that's been planted in the world that there's no connecting to the two, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that the gospel is designed to do, is to get people to connect with God in their heart, and then they start fellowshipping with God in spirit, even in truth, and then out of that union with God, there's a whole lot of let uses. There's a whole lot of that going on. You're receiving strength from God. Your body becomes animated by the strength of God. And then you find yourself doing things out of your union with God that you never could have done before. You find His life pouring out of you. You find His word pouring out of you. You find His love pouring out of you. And yes, that's awesome and beautiful, and it shines like a light, but that ain't you serving God. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think one of the greatest challenges to grace is coming to grips with the persuasion that there's nothing that we do. Because we want to be servants, we want to all of those things, because we want to grab hold of the knowledge of good and evil and then make it ours and do something with it. To me, the biggest persuasion that I've had to work through is just sit. Just sit at the feet of Jesus and don't do anything. And then let us become real in your life. But the hurdle from just sitting and doing, that's a big gap for many people. And that's where they just reject that completely. Oh, I got to do something.
Yeah.
The lie of the serpent is so powerful in that regard that it keeps many from just resting in Jesus.
And then what you do isn't really born from freedom.
Yeah.
You see, early on in my young adult life, I had the mindset that everything I was doing was what was serving God. And I was trying to be exalted through my service of God.
Absolutely.
Or what I could bring forth for God through the ability He gave me.
We've all been there.
Right? That's what I lived with. That's what I lived with. But see, anything I could have done from that perspective would not have been born from freedom.
No.
Nor would it have been born from the tree of life. It would have been born from my fornication with the flesh.
Yes.
Right? And so God wasn't going to come and help me to fornicate with the flesh. Right? He didn't leave me or reject me, but He wasn't like, yeah, let's do that. Right? And so a period of time went by where He was busy working freedom in my heart. And I had concluded, well, I guess there'll be no ministry. All right. I don't have some incessant need to be up front and center. So glory to God, I'll work this finance job, man. Becky and I get paid a lot of money. We got a nice big house. We can buy whatever we want. Look at all my nice suits. I can buy whatever car I want and go on whatever vacation I want. I'll just sit here and do this. See, but I had concluded, because I wasn't doing all these things, quote unquote, for God.
Yeah.
Really, I would have been doing it for myself. Because if you think you're doing it so you can move up the totem pole in God's eyes, you're actually doing it for yourself.
Exactly.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
you're actually
right.
doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that meant, no, I'm not going to do any ministry. No, God was busy setting my heart free. So then something could come forth from our union. But I didn't understand all that back then. Right? So then he sets me free, and then out of our freedom in our union together, something was born. I had to let us go and minister. I had that moment when I was 5 years old. Let us say something to these people that can set them free and bring them life. Right? Him and I had that conversation when I was a little kid. And then he's been working it the whole time. Mm-hmm. And now that let us manifest it. Right? Let us get up and go back to Slidell and start a church. Mm-hmm. And even then, when I first heard that, the idea sounded nice, but I thought, well, we don't have the resources to do that, so that's out. Seriously, I mean, that's what I thought. Well, I need $50,000. We just bought this house. It's in the middle of the first 2 months of the Great Recession. How are we going to sell this house? Your plan's out, buddy. You know? And then 1 month later, the guy comes in and says, listen, we're shutting down the company. And we're paying all the managers 4 weeks of severance for every year they've been with the company. I've been there 15 years. And I had a nice big fat salary because I was a manager. Becky had been there 11 years. She had a nice big fat salary because she was a manager. So that $50,000 that I told God we needed, we got more than that just in my severance. And I just start grinning in the meeting, just thinking, how can this be? How can that be? Because listen, I love the guy who owned the company, and the guy was always good to me. So please understand, this is not a negative word about that guy. I have my own weaknesses, but his weaknesses is money. Because he was raised as a little boy to be afraid of the government coming and taking his money. And the government creating a dynamic where they would convince the poor people that the rich people were the SOBs that were causing them problems. So he lived with this fear that not only would the government come to take his money, but that the government would get all the people who didn't have money to hate him and want to kill him. And so this whole thing was born in front of his face. But it's outside of this guy to give 4 weeks of severance because of that fear. This was his own money. It wasn't like a corporate entity in the sense that it didn't involve personal people. This was his family's money. Wow. Right? And you can almost see him like, what am I saying as I'm saying it? I'm giving them 4 weeks of severance because that's outside of the norm. He'd have been very gracious just to give us 2 weeks. He'd have been very gracious just to give us 4 months of severance. He went above and beyond that, you know, and it was God. And so I just get this big smile on my face like, unbelievable, I guess we're going back to Slidell. But then we still had the house to sell. And so we put the house up on the market immediately, thinking it's going to take at least 2 or 3 years. That's how long it's going to take for us to collect out the loans because we're a finance company. And the house sold in a month. The realtor even told us that there was no way the house was going to sell right now. Sold in a month. Boom. Whoa. And then it sold for $400,000. And because it was the time where the real estate market was crumbling and they were starting to prosecute people for their appraisals, and they were starting to threaten to throw appraisers in jail, they came in and underappraised our house by $25,000 because they didn't want to risk it. That blew up that whole contract. Sure. The people still wanted it.
Wow.
And so God did all those things. All I did was say, yeah, let us, man. I've always had, and the funny thing is I always had a desire in my heart to get back here. And I never knew why. Like I always had a burning in my bones to get back here. And there were several times before that where I tried to make it happen. And it fell through. Katrina. I was going to move back here the September after Katrina. I had even sold, my lease had ended and I didn't get a new lease. I was sleeping on my friend's sofa because I thought it's only a month. It wasn't because I was a young kid and I didn't care. It's because I thought it's only a month. I can make it for a month on their sofa. And then Katrina hits. Nixed. So I was there for what? 10 more years. Right. No, not 10 more years. 5 more years.
Wow. That's good.
The miracle to me on all that story too is that God had to also be dealing with Becky's heart.
Yeah.
Because that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. It is a big deal.
Right.
It is a big deal. And we had a good little while to deal with it because it took us 2 years to collect out the loans. So we were both managers. So what that meant is as our business, the loan department was immediately laid off because we're not processing any more loans. But my department was the accounts receivable department and accounts placeable. So I was going to be there. And so I had 40-something employees. So, after 3 or 4 months, you lay off like 5 of them because you don't have, and then you keep going. Well, at the end of the day, what was like 70 people in the company ended up with 5 of us in there. Becky, myself, the president and the owner, and his secretary.
Wow.
And so towards the last year and a half there, I didn't have any work to do. And so I was just sitting in there with no work to do, collecting my full check with all of my resources out on my desk. I'm talking about the Bible and stuff, and studying and praying all day. That's what I did all day for 8 hours. I came in and got paid to do that.
Wow.
God set all that up.
Wow.
Preparing my heart,
Yeah.
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 He did all that. All I did was, let us. Yeah. It's like, get you up out of this land, Abraham.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Why did your boss keep you on for that year and a half when you had no work to do?
Because he had to have somebody there to, I had the work that I had to do was I had to go through the payments that were processed, that were received in. But that amounted to 45 minutes in the day, right? And so that was nothing. We didn't have any new customers. The whole thing was just blown up.
Amazing.
He didn't want to manage the collection department. And so when I say no work, I worked like 9.5 hours a day, and that was filled with work. And now I had maybe like an hour and a half a day because I would have to take some supervisor calls every once in a while. He didn't want to do that. But, when you have 9.5 hours a day and then you have an hour and a half, right? There's a big difference,
Right. Exactly.
And so we just sat there. I kept thinking he's got to decrease our pay because he was paying me based on managing 40 employees. Especially like the last 6 months, I had like 3 guys there. He's still paying me the same amount.
God's good.
I keep thinking about the dog groomer. We had a really, really good talk. He was the slowest dog groomer.
He's soaking it all in.
Every time we talked, he stopped working. Because he wanted to talk about the Lord.
Yeah.
And so I shared my testimony with him, and basically I said, for 35 years as a born-again believer, I tried so hard to prove my love for God and to show God that I was a good Christian. And as you started this morning, you were talking about how we judged ourselves according to the wrong tree. I judged myself as a bad Christian. But if I could do more, if I could read my Bible more and pray more and serve more, then I would be a good Christian. And so I was telling him all this. And I said, and after all these years of trying so hard to please the Lord, I finally came to the realization God showed me all He wants to do is love me. And the guy's eyes got big as saucers. It's such a flip, when you try so hard to love Him and to prove your love for Him and to be a good Christian, and then you realize, hey man, just throw all that, like you said, you had it out with the Lord in the backyard, and the Lord said, everything you ever learned, just throw it away. That's how I felt when the Lord said to me, hey man, would you just let me love you? That's all He ever wanted to do.
And listen, the reason he welled up at that time was he knew that what you were saying was true.
He's nowhere new.
He knew it was true.
Yeah.
And
He'd been yearning to hear that probably for a while now.
Sure.
What is it? Okay, you brought up this whole point about coming along somebody that, is caught in a fault. All right, in the same way, how do you find yourself coming along someone that does have a passion? Okay, in the case of the guy at the Saints game, all right? I mean, something was in him about, handing off tracts, and you were like, man, that's not in my heart. Okay, so I mean, at what point, or how is it that you find yourself going, what's the passion or what's the vision that God has given you, and then you come alongside that, or you lift people up in walking into that vision or that passion that's in their heart, and it's not, I gotta do this to prove that I'm a good Christian. It really is out of their heart. I mean, it's something that, I look at some things and I kind of go, boy, if I stay in Phil's mind, I'll look at what they just spoke and went, that ain't possible. But then I can step back and say, they really have a belief they really have something coming out of them, you know, to do this thing that looks impossible. You know, I mean, those are the things that I wonder about. Like, where do I belong in that?
So you're filled with the same spirit they are. Your spirit, it's just a matter of spiritual discernment to understand and let the Spirit speak to your heart about. Yeah, this is self-made out of this person's own effort.
Right.
This is me.
This is
jump in and help. Right. If that's what God's leading you to do. But I think it's just a matter of listening to your heart and how it responds to what the person is doing.
Your knower will know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just you feel a desire in your heart.
It's just like with the Saints game thing. I knew right in my heart at that time
no.
that was not for me to do.
Right.
That God had not moved me
Right.
to hand out tracts at the Saints game.
And if you did it, it would have been out of obligation.
Listen, it just wasn't in my character.
Oh.
It wasn't in my repertoire of things to do. Nor was God moving me in any way to do that. So I just expressed that to him. Now listen, when I said I'm not handing out tracts at the that was God telling me, I'm not handing out, because from the depths of my heart, and I was a believer, I was in union with Christ. That was not me to do that. But when the church came around and said, let's hand out the gospel of John, something inside of me said, that's me. I'm going to do that. And it's got to be the Lord motivating your heart to do something. That's what that comes from.
And it's effortless when it's
It's
the Lord.
effortless at that point. It's not something that you predisposed to do. What am I going to do here? Or how am I going to move this person here? Or how am I going to be moved by that person?
Right.
Or what am I going to say to this person if they're in error? Or if you don't have to be prejudging the things that you're going to be doing. You don't have to worry about that stuff up ahead.
Exactly.
You just relax and live your life.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you relax and live your life. And just to add some doctrinal words to what they said, which is both very true, you can look at it like this. If you feel an obligation, that ain't God. So if you're feeling an obligation to come alongside them, that's not the Spirit of God.
Right.
If you're feeling just this like cheerfulness, like Paul talked about, God loves a cheerful giver, right? You can apply that same thing. If you feel just like an excitement or a cheerfulness to come alongside of them, then you know that's the Spirit of God leading you. If you're feeling obligated, like you should or you must or you have to, then that's a great indication that you're not really being led to do it, right? Because God doesn't lead that way, right?
Yes.
And even if that's not enough for you, if you're confused about whether you feel obligated or you just feel tired, just ask God to make it clear for you. Saying, Lord, I'm not feeling to do this. But if it's just that I'm tired or something, you possess the strength to overcome my tiredness, and into your hands I commit my confusion. And if I actually have a desire to do this, you're going to bring forth the cheerfulness in me to do it. Right? And that's how I judge it. If I feel an obligation, I know it's not God. If I'm taking on the burden of their feelings and that's why I'm doing it, that's not God. Right? Because I tend to take on the burden of people's feelings. That's like one of my big weaknesses. And so if I see somebody in a place where I think something that they're busy with is causing them hurt feelings, sometimes I won't be led by the Spirit. I'll be led by my desire to heal their hurt feelings. And I'll actually come in and help them do something that I wasn't being led to help them to do just because I wanted to heal their hurt feelings. But really, they're busy with something maybe they shouldn't be busy with. Right. And now I come to help them continue in the thing that they need to get free from. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's why that's why obligation is a great indication of whether you're doing it. Because God does not desire for anybody to give anything unto any work by obligation. Amen. It's a cheerfulness that will come out of you. You feel cheerful about what they're doing. You feel cheerful about who it's touching. You'll feel cheerful. Like I got a friend in New Orleans who's got a church called The Hub, and she really has a heart for the homeless people and gets out there for the homeless people like crazy in the French Quarter. And they're doing some Thanksgiving service at Saints and Sinners on Bourbon Street. And so she just posted something on Facebook about them needing donations and them needing help. And just immediately out of my heart, I just felt a cheerfulness. And I'm slammed, man. And it's the day before Thanksgiving, and I just messaged her and said, I want to help any way I can. And I had in my mind that I'm going to go serve these people. And she messaged me back, yeah, can you preach the message? And so, see, that was God, because she was busy thinking, I want to serve these people, but the message has to be preached. Who's going to do that? I don't necessarily want to do that today. And then out of me, God, see, there was a cheerfulness. Right? I didn't feel obligated.
Okay. Got it.
You see?
Yes.
And I was busy, and I am tired. This month has been hectic for me, and Thanksgiving is coming. You know, but I felt to reach out, so I did it. Now, I didn't feel an obligation. So if I would have felt, well, I really ought to go down there and do it. I mean, after all, we're supposed to serve.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
That's the indication.
Hey,
That's not by the grace.
Got it.
You kind of a crazy thing. I've been asked to do things, and not necessarily of a spiritual nature, sometimes in that way. And I thought to myself, I absolutely do not want to do that. But that person wanted me to do that. They really wanted me to do it. So you know what I did? Contrary to how I felt not wanting to do that thing, I went and did it. No, not to serve them, not to serve God, but just because that person desired to do it, and I was going to help them. I was going to help them do this thing. So what I was doing was almost contrary to what I thought was right or needed to be done or what I wanted to do. But in the midst of doing it like that, some good things came out of it. I don't know if you understand where I'm coming from.
No, I do.
In other words,
Yeah, I do.
I wasn't capitulating to some spiritual urge of someone else to do something with them for God, but I was just loving that person in being willing to do something I really didn't even want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of that, if you're doing it with the right attitude, believe it or not, that was the right attitude. Not wanting to go, but going anyway was the right attitude.
Yeah, but the thing is underneath it all, you still had a desire for preferring their life over your own. So you might have felt not, but underneath it all, you still sat with a desire to do it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
That their life was more precious to you than your own.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's exactly right.
And so you were still living by desire.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're right.
So the bottom line is, if you do something that you,
If you don't have
if you
rain
think
on
you ought to and you do it, you get hardening of the arteries.
Okay.
Hardening of the arteries.
it.